Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You are listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.
Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast. This is your host, Dr. Larry Widman, sometimes known as Doc in the Mindset World. I say we love doing this podcast because of the last 20 years, I've worked with some of the greatest athletes, coaches, leaders, and teams. And of course, Coach Jess has been on board the last year or so doing podcasts together. And she's a multi-sport athlete, a volleyball coach, and an elite mindset coach. And we always say the definition of maxing out is given the talent, the health, the depth, the intangibles. Can a team reach the limits of their capabilities, or an individual? And then can they do it under pressure? Because we always say if you can't do it when it matters, what's the point? When we're lucky to have guests on, we like to learn from them as much as learning about some of the things that we've heard over the years from different athletes and coaches. And so today we're pretty lucky. We haven't had twins on before. So we have Hannah and Lauren Camenzind. They are both sophomores at the University of Arkansas. They are softball players. Prior to going to the University of Arkansas, they went to Scott Catholic, where they were back-to-back state champions. And Hannah's a pitcher. Lauren is a catcher and an infielder. Now, one of the first things I have to comment on before I even ask you what your definitions of maxing out are was, first off, welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I want to know, Lauren, you're a little bit of a slacker before we talk about maxing out. I hear you hit 489 in high school, but you hit a little over 600 inside. We definitely want to talk a little bit about why you couldn't hit it in excess of 500 in your softball. Geez. So when you heard my definition of maxing out, Hannah, why don't we start with you? What's your definition of maxing out?
I think I just say giving it your all to everything. I think it's not just giving your all to a few things, but in everything you do, every part of, if it's softball, if it's school, if it's just life in general, just everything.
Yeah, so we'll get into that as one of our 4 C's called commitment, which is being all in for everything. Lauren, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say you doing everything to your best capability and making sure you give everything that you have while you do it.
Yeah. So give us a little sense. I gave a snippet of your background in terms of at least where you went to high school and now on to college. Give us a little sense of what it was like growing up as twins, and then, how you found the sport of softball, and were there some other things that you were interested in along the way?
Well, we played softball ever since we were little. We played for the little YMCA team when we were 5 and 6, and then we played just softball for a long time. And then right when we got 10, 11, we picked up basketball for a little bit too. And we played basketball until our freshman year, and then we were just softball mostly for the most part growing up. Yeah.
We didn't play select softball until we were probably about 9.
We were 8 turning 9.
We tried out for our first select team. So
when did you guys figure out you were pretty good at this thing called softball?
Oh gosh, it was a while.
Oh yeah, I'd say probably first year of 14, so 13 or 14 years old.
Yeah,
when I was first starting. 8 or 9?
We were horrible.
We were horrible. Worst people on the team. Literally the worst players on the team.
So what was the keys to success there between when you were the worst players onto the team to when you started to figure out we're pretty good at softball? Give us a couple pointers of what did it took? Because there's some other people that can relate to not being very good at their sport when they started, and yet you're both Division I athletes at an SEC school.
I would say that. So when we first tried out, I did not want to go at all. I was like, I do not want to go. I was like, I don't care if they want me. I'm not joining the team. I was like, that's awesome. Lauren can join the team, but I will not play. And my parents are like, seriously, Hannah? So then when I went to try, I didn't know how to bunt. I didn't catch a single ball. Literally, it was horrible. They were like, we only took you because you were athletic. But I think it was just, everyone on the first team I played was a year older than us in school. And when we first went, my parents kind of knew. They kind of had an idea that we were pretty behind. And so they kind of told us that there was lots of tears. We were like, oh my gosh, like, why are we not playing? Like, constantly asking them. And they were like, like, everyone else is a lot better than you. So it was like, I mean, it was hard to hear, but like, I guess when you're hearing it from your parents, it's kind of like, it's coming from a good place. So it was like, they told us, like, you can either go to work hard or you can be sad about it. And yeah, it really sucks. But if you're just going to be sad about it, you're just going to continue to be where you're at and not get any better. So they kind of just had a conversation with us, and they were like, like, yeah, we know it sucks. It sucks for us to watch as parents. Like, you're not playing. It's not fun right now. But, like, you can either go to work or feel sorry for yourself. So it's kind of like that, I guess, is kind of what.
Yeah, I would say
the little
just not giving up. I mean, there's a lot of points where we could have just picked a different sport or told our parents to put us on a different team, and we stuck with it for a long time. And there was days it wasn't easy. But yeah, so I would just say never giving up and just realizing that, like, you can do it and not worry about how, like, you can't do it and where you're at in the moment, and just think, like, if you work hard, you'll get there at some point.
Yeah, working hard and belief goes a long way. Coach Jess, what are your thoughts?
Doc, I have to ask, as siblings, right? Do you have other siblings that helped breed that competitiveness in you? Some that were easier on you than most? I mean, together, are you better together or separate? So I guess my biggest question is, as a competitor, are you better together or separate?
I think together. I mean, yeah, everything we do, I'm always like, can I do it better than Lauren? I mean, like, even if we're like competing at practice and we do it at a completely different time, I'll be like, what Lauren get? Or as soon as we get in the car, I'm like, hey, what'd you get on that? So I definitely would say together.
We're very competitive together, but like, we also push each other together, I would say too. Like, I feel like being sisters and, like, especially twins when you're the same age, like, that's been like one of our greatest strengths. I feel like throughout our athletic career so far, is like we've had each other to push each other, like in the cages, like when someone's like having a bad day and the other one's hitting really good, like she's having a good day, you can't let like her look that bad in the cage, like you better step it up. So I feel like it's also been like our greatest strength along the way too.
So we talk a lot about confidence, right? And I love that you just shared that competitive fire between you both. And Doc, I'm just going to dive right in here. As elite athletes, how do you work with comparison? As a competitor, you're always wanting to be better. You're always wanting to be elite, but how do you level each other up? But how do you draw the fine line of not comparing each other to where it would be negative towards your confidence?
I feel like, especially for me, like in high school ball, like Hannah always had like more home runs than me. She always had like higher batting average than me. So it was hard not to, because especially like you're there in your household, like you hear it every day. So I feel like it's just something that like you have to realize, like every person has their own path. I would say like she might be a home run hitter, but I could have more walks or like just like things like that. So just realizing that not every person's path is going to be the exact same. Like, yeah, you're going to have comparison from athlete to athlete, but just still realizing that like you still are your own person and that your path isn't going to be the same as somebody else's.
I would say that we kind of like experienced it a lot our freshman season, like you're going into a new team, there's new people to compete against, so you never know like what's going to happen for her, when it's going to happen, and when it's going to happen for me. I think at a younger age, we experienced things like more together, whereas last year she got to play before I did. And so it's kind of like that month of sitting around, like comparing, why am I not getting to play and my sister does? And so it's kind of like when I was comparing that, I was hurting myself because I was letting myself get so down that I was like, oh my gosh, like I was making myself miserable over like, why my sister's not getting to play, instead of like, okay, like, wow, she's getting to play. What can I do that she's doing that's getting her on the field? So I think it's just looking at it instead of like letting myself get down about it, instead of like in the past, I used it as like, okay, I want what my sister has. Like, okay, what can I do to get better? So using like it as motivation, but not like beating yourself up to the point that it's like you're feeling so down about yourself that it's like miserable.
Doc, I have one more question for them on this topic before I turn it back. But was there a mindfulness strategy that helped you become aware that, hey, I'm comparing right now and this is not great? What did you do about it?
I think, yeah, for me, it was like my parents were in town one weekend, and it was kind of like her first, I think it was your first start. You were playing Arizona. Yeah. And I had like a few like at bats before that, but we were like in the car and we were talking about it, and I got like really mad. Like my sister, I was like, like, you're getting to play and I'm not. And my mom was like, Hannah, like, like, why would you say that about your sister? And it was like, in that moment, I was like, wow, like, I don't even care that my sister is playing, and I'm like so concerned about myself. I think that's kind of like, it just took me a minute to realize like I was being so negative that I couldn't see the positive, and like how many people would kill to do what I'm doing. Like I was just so negative. So I think it was just like my parents are finally like, Hannah, like, look how negative you're being, for me to like finally see it. And then I was like, wow, like I really need to work on like just finding the positive in things. Like I get to experience something that not a lot of people do. So I think it was just for me, like, instead, if it wasn't measurable successes, just, wow, like what did I do good today that wasn't softball or something like that?
Anything to add to that, Lauren, at all?
Yeah, I would just say like finding like the little wins instead of like thinking things as like a big picture. Like especially like there's points like in my season last year where, if you don't get a hit one series, like you got another SEC team, like there's no little lull to get yourself back out of it. So just figuring out like what little wins along the way that you can find to help you get yourself out of it, instead of thinking of like, oh, wow, I didn't get a hit. Or maybe it's, oh, I got on base this game. Or instead of it just not being a hit or a home run, just finding like the little ways to get yourself out of it instead of thinking big picture, I would say helped a lot for me.
Finding the little wins. That matters to a lot of athletes, in the keeping perspective in the big picture. Now, Coach Jess, of course, I already feel extremely guilty for comparing their batting averages at the very beginning. And when obviously that's a touch point. And what's interesting is one of my questions, and I maybe you've answered it already, and maybe that is your biggest stress point, because you've talked about it being your strength too, being together and being sisters and everything that goes with that. Is there something besides comparison that's caused stress between the two of you, either in high school or in college?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'd say comparison is really the biggest thing. I mean, we don't really get like too worked up about anything. And usually like the comparison thing doesn't really get to us like to a whole lot. But then I think it's just like, I'm trying to think like back to your high school season when
I feel like comparison happened a lot with us when like one was like really succeeding and the other one was like at their like lowest of lows. And it's just like you reflect on like your sister and what she's doing, and it's hard for you not to think it and compare it back to yourself. So I feel like that's when it hit us the hardest, especially like my sophomore year. She was like way exceeding over me. And so like I feel like that was the hardest one.
Whenever, I feel like it's pretty like easy when you're like right there with each other, but then I think it's like, you can't control when I'll be at like my highest competition level and Lauren might be in the biggest slump of her career. So I think it's just like when you're going through your playing career and you're experiencing those things at different times, like no one time have we both been playing, very rarely have we both been playing at our highest level at the same time. Yeah. So I think it's just, that's when you fall into the trap of like comparison. It's like things aren't going your way. So then it's like you just fall into that where you're like, oh gosh, like why can I not do it like my sister is?
Yeah. So Chris, Jess and I are going to hit a little bit on confidence right now, because when we really have been been lucky enough to be around enough elite athletes, especially high-performing female athletes. There's no question that confidence is the number one thing that high performers struggle with at times. And that overlaps a little bit with self-talk and a little overlap with composures that we want to kind of take a dive in with you. But let's talk about confidence for a little bit and just give us both of you, give us a general overview. Start, Lauren, with you. When you think about where confidence comes from, can you put into words just a little bit for you where you get your confidence? Where does it come from?
I would say, I'm trying to think.
I love this, and here's why, because some of these words sound so easy.
Yeah.
They sound so easy until you ask somebody to define confidence, or where do you get it from? And that's not an unusual answer at times. So I'll give you a little hint to start it off, though. I mean, and I always say this to a team too: if you want to get an A in math and you got a test on Friday, what gives you the right to be confident going into that test?
Studying.
Yeah, studying. So in athletics, we would call that preparation. Maybe what Hannah said earlier, just about being all into everything, when you talk about maxing out, doing everything, not just softball, everything you can do to be great. But so for you, let's assume for a minute that that you put in the work, because I know you guys both work really hard. It's kind of a trait of Nebraskans and kids that got Catholic as well too. I mean, and you don't get to Arkansas without that. But it's interesting how many elite athletes still struggle with their confidence at times, even though they put in the work. So our number 2 ingredient is self-talk. So maybe why don't we just take a dive in, both of you, on that, and talk to us a little bit about the role that self-talk plays in either helping your confidence or hurting your confidence.
I mean, I think it's a huge thing. I think it can do both. It can hurt and help. I think it depends I guess if you're struggling and you don't have good self-talk, yeah, it's going to hurt you. So I think that it's something that we talked about a lot last year. Our coaches did with our team. We kind of went to a point where we were really struggling, and she sat the whole team down and she was like, we really have to get better at how we're talking to ourselves. And they made this thing and they put it on the doors to our locker room. And the first thing was how you talk to yourself. And, she was just like, the language we're using when we're talking to ourselves, when we're messing up, like things like that. We're just like, she's like, that's what's tearing us down right now, is because we have terrible self-talk to each other. And I guess, going through high school, I was just kind of like, oh, like, whatever. And then in that moment, I was like, wow, yeah, it's really bad. You think, oh, who cares that I just said that to myself? But then it's 20 minutes later when you're trying to make a play and you're thinking about the last thing you said to yourself was you can't do it. And I think it just really hit me in that moment that I was like, wow, I really need to do a better job about how I'm talking to myself, especially when things aren't going my way.
Let's stick with you for a minute, Hannah, and then Lauren, I want you to answer the same question. Give us a couple self-talk phrases that you might say to yourself that aren't great. And then when you're aware of it, what do you do about it? What do you do to change your self-talk?
I'd say some of them are oh God, I really suck, or how did I do that? Or why did I do that? I'm so stupid. How did that happen? Things like that. And I would say to change, or if I'm going into a bat, I'll be like, oh, I really hope I don't strike out. And I think it's changing it from, I really hope I don't strike out, to I'm going to get a hit, instead of I hope I get a hit. No, I'm going to get a hit. That's the biggest way I try to change it, is instead of turning it into things of oh, I hope, or I don't know. Most of the things is I hope, and changing it to no, I'm going to. So you don't even let yourself think about the what if.
Love that. What about you, Lauren? What are some common self-talk phrases you say when it's not great, and then what do you do about it?
I would say I use can't a lot. Especially if I'm in a slump, I'll be like, well, Dad, I can't hit. Or I just go straight to I can't do it. So I would say that is my biggest one. And then when I say it, I always I feel little wins helps me a lot. So if I'm hitting and I'll realize I'm telling myself, oh, I can't do it right now, instead of being let's work to get a hit this time, I'll be like, let's work for a quality at bat here. And then go off of that win to like the next at bat and be like, got a quality at bat the next time. Let's work for a hard ball and play this at bat. And just like little things like that, I feel like help me build up instead of just going straight for like the overall result.
Before I switch back to Coach Jess, you mentioned your coaches had pointed this out to your team. How were your coaches aware of what was going on with your self-talk? I mean,
I would say our body language was bad, especially like as soon as we were a very young team last year, most of our players were underclassmen, freshmen, and sophomores. So a lot of it was new to us, and just like we'd get hit in the mouth and you could just tell that we gave up 5 runs in the first inning, and just our energy was so deflated. And so we just couldn't figure a way how to get out of it. And so that was, I feel like, the biggest way they could tell. Definitely.
I think they could just tell like it was just so contagious. Like it might have been just 3 or 4 people who it happened to, and then next thing you know, it's 5 or 6. When it's 3 or 4 people, it's like, okay, like that's still a lot, but like the team can still perform. And I think it got to the point where it was like just getting so contagious to everybody else. They were like, okay, like it's a problem right now.
I love that because things are contagious. Positivity is contagious. Negativity is contagious. And so I love that you pointed that out, that your coaches could tell, because we often talk about body language being the window into your self-talk. So both for coaches and athletes that are listening, that awareness that you need to have, if one of your athletes, as body language is bad, they're usually talking poorly to themselves. So then it's the job of the coach, or we'll get into it a little bit here, the role of a teammate to help another teammate get out of their own head when you can tell your teammate's stuck. Jess, you've been listening to this. I know it's a topic near and dear to your heart as well, this confidence, self-talk, and other ingredients that go along with it. What do you have to add?
How important is it off the field, right, and away from sport, that will help allow you to have great body language, to have great self-talk? Let's just say too is, so I want to know off the field, right, what are you pouring into to help you have that better self-confidence, that better self-talk? And then was there a certain thing that you did that was a positive physical reaction? And I don't know, some people clap, some people, tap their heart, but was there something physical that you did in a positive way to go along with that positive self-talk on or off the field?
I would say like a physical thing that I usually do is just my breathing, I think is a huge thing for me. Like I can just slow myself down, and when I feel myself getting like super tense or like I'm just like really down, it's just like I'm starting to breathe like super heavy and super fast. So I think that to really like calm myself down and just get like clear my mind is just to like really control my breathing is a physical thing for me.
Yeah, I would say breathing too. And then like when you said like off the field, a big thing that like our team's big on this year is like when things are going bad at softball, we always say like we need to fill our buckets. So like when like we had a bad weekend one day and our coaches were like, no one needs to like, we always said like, don't come to softball, take the weekend off and go fill your bucket. So it's always like finding something outside of softball that's not going to make you think about softball still and will benefit you. Because sitting in your room crying about how you're in a slump isn't going to benefit you. It's just going to make it worse. So like going to the farmer's market with your friends or going on a hike, just getting your mind away from that and filling your bucket in a different way besides going to the indoor to hit for 3 hours. It's just not going to fill your bucket. It's just going to make you think about it more.
I think that's something too that like I realized more when I got to college was, you think, oh, I did bad on the weekend. The first thing I need to do is go get in the cage more. And I think it's just like you don't realize like how like you think, oh, I'm getting better. But at the same time, if you're going in the cage and your mind isn't there, it's just as beneficial for you to take the day off and go for a walk or go get ice cream or go get your nails done or something just to clear your mind. Because if you're going in the cage and your attitude's bad, you're really getting no work done. So I think it's just like she said, filling your bucket, finding things outside of softball that taking the day off might be just as beneficial as if you were in there in the cage getting the work in.
Yeah, I want to go back. So breathing techniques, I think you both use that. How many? Is it like a deep breath? Is it how many second hold? Do you have a strategy specifically in that? And then I have one more question.
I definitely just do a deep breath, like especially before I get into the box, I do one. And then when I was catching last year, I would do one before every pitch. Just because catching can get like, for me, it would speed up a lot for me, especially like if there's runners on base. Like you just have a lot to do back there. So just resetting my mind before each pitch was a big thing for me.
For me, it was, the deep breaths, and I would try to make them pretty long. So usually it'd be like around like 2 to 3 seconds I would try to do. And then if I'm hitting, I usually try to find a spot to look at on my bat, and then I close my eyes just because there's so much going around you. Just close your eyes to clear your mind. And then pitching, the same thing. I take a deep breath before every pitch, and I have the same routine and stuff like that.
I would say as a team, we do a lot of we do yoga once a week, and so we work on breathing there a lot. And then once we get to the field, like because usually we fly in like that morning before our game, we'll go like if we're away, we'll go to the other team's field, and we'll all just like lay on the grass in the outfield if it's nicer than indoor, and we'll do like box breathing. And then like while we're doing it, our coaches always have us like imagine what we're doing good, what we're gonna do good that day. Like imagine us like if it's a pitcher getting a strikeout or making a great play, just like putting positive thoughts into our brains before we like go out and compete.
Doc, what do you think? These sound like similar strategies that we teach at Max Out Mindset.
Yeah, well, first, there's two of them that I was listening to. There's one is you talked about a reset technique, looking at your bat, closing your eyes. What does it do for you, and how did you come up with that strategy?
What it does for me is it takes all the thinking away. I'm really bad at overthinking. I always think about the what if and all that kind of stuff. So just closing my eyes really just makes my mind really go blank. It just gives me a minute before I step in the box just to breathe, clear my mind before I get back to my plan. And then I've honestly been doing it ever since I was probably like 11 or 12. My first hitting coach, he made us come up with a routine when I was like 9. He was like, you need to come up with something you do every single time when you get in the box. And he was like, and it needs to like include a deep breath. So that's what I came up with. And I've been doing it since then.
Can you put into words the outcome behavior that a routine like that you've been doing for a long time does what for you?
I mean, I think it's helped me out of slumps. It's kept things good for a longer period of time. I just think that it's probably one of the most beneficial things I've done with my hitting. Just because you're playing a failure sport. So I think it just really, it helped me at a young age. I didn't realize it was helping me until now that I've done it in college. I'm like, wow, something that simple has helped me so much.
I love that. Routines are so important for human beings, and if it was ripped away from you, it would lead to anxiety and chaos and a lot of things like that. Now, Lauren, you mentioned something else. You talked about laying on the ground, doing box breathing, which is to us is 4 in through the mouth, or 4 in through the nose, hold for 4, 4 out through the mouth, hold for 4. It's 4, 4, 4, 4. It's a breathing technique that also calms people down and relaxes them. But you paired it to something obviously that we know as visualization or imagery, like picturing yourself doing plays the way you want to or something positive. Does that really work for you? Is that just what we call hocus pocus? Or tell us the benefits of laying on the ground when the weather's great or not, and closing your eyes, box breathing, and picturing yourself doing or saying positive things.
I mean, for me, it's not always like it's not gonna like lead you to get 4 hits in a game. I mean, that determines like pitch selection and stuff like that. But I would say it takes like the pressure off a little bit, especially like as a freshman. Like you're going into a series against Alabama. Like I was nervous, and so I just feel like doing that would just like put me at ease a little bit more, and just realizing like I'm thinking that I can get a hit. So just knowing like in the back of my mind at some point, I know I can do it. Like I'm visualizing myself doing it. So of course I can do it at some point if I can think of myself doing it.
Yeah, we love that because there's some real power science of deep breathing. There's a reason why breathing actually helps athletes, and there's a reason why visualization helps. There's a science behind them both. We're not going to bore everyone right now about them, other than to say there is tremendous science why deep breathing and visualization techniques help elite athletes perform at a higher level. I want to take you back to one thing and then have see what Coach Jess has to say. But when we talk about the foundation of confidence and being able to focus or refocus some of these reset techniques, we frequently talk about the role the commitment plays with that, and that without that foundation of commitment, at least when the pressure hits, it's hard to be confident. It's hard to be calm, composure. It's hard to focus and refocus when the stress hits. So going back to commitment, we talk about what we call the four legs of elite performance. There's a physical leg, a mental leg, technical leg, and tactical, right? Tactical is game planning, film watching. The technical is all your softball skills, The mental is working on your mindset, like confidence. We're taking care of mental health, which we want to take a little dive into here in a bit. And then there's a physical component, which involves sleep and hydration and nutrition and recovery and strength and conditioning. Let's start with you, Hannah, first. Physical leg, the mental leg, the technical leg, the tactical leg. Is there one of those legs that is a strength of yours that helps set the foundation for confidence for you?
I would say mentally. I would say I'm a very mellow person, so I try not to ride the highs too much or the lows too much. I know it's something I got away from a little bit at times, but I think that's something that I really try to take pride in myself. I know being a pitcher is something that I really had to be really committed to, honestly, just because the team's depending on you. And so I think when everyone's looking at you out there, it's if you show them that you're believing in yourself, it makes it a lot easier for them to buy into what you're doing out there. So I would say my mentality.
Love that. What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, I would say mentality and back to the confidence part, all of that coming together is one of helps me a lot. Because if I go in there and I'm not thinking that I'm gonna get a hit and stuff like that, it's not gonna happen for me.
So if we were to ask you this question, we always talk about getting 1% better or 1 inch better or 1 degree better. Of those four legs, which one of those, pick something from one of those legs that you could do a little bit better this year. And if you do it better this spring, you're just a little bit more committed than you were last spring, even if you already have a high level of commitment. What's one thing that both of you can identify that you could do a little bit better, or maybe you already are working on this year?
I honestly think it's the same for me. I think it's my greatest strength, but it's also my biggest weakness. I think that I'm very hard on myself, and I think that I have a really good mentality when I'm competing, but I think that when I wasn't competing, it's what tore me down the most, because I just beat myself up day after day about it. So I think that improving that I'll see it more on the field, and it will help me stay more consistent. So I think definitely it's the same for me. I think when it's great, I'm great at it. When it's bad, I'm not so good.
Before we switch to Laura, then, what are you doing about it? So how do you know you're going to get through this season? I mean, how do you have confidence you're going to get through the season and do a better job of not beating yourself up so much?
Mine's my self-talk, just really finding ways that I've improved talking to myself and stuff like that. And just the biggest thing was basically my self-talk, and in our hitting journal, it's just writing things down, talking about our plan, writing it down so I'm not just overwhelming myself in my thoughts is probably my biggest thing. And just my confidence. I think that I was always a confident person going into college. I always believed in myself, but I think that when I struggled, I got away from that. I really just started doubting myself. So I think that my confidence will be something that I'm really trying to just believe in myself at all times, no matter if I'm at my highest playing level or my lowest, just still believing in myself.
I love that. Lauren, same question. One thing that you could do a little bit better or that you're already working on?
I would say my self-talk needs to get a lot better. I feel like I'm a very happy-go-lucky person. I don't really let it get to me that much, but when it's bad, it's bad. And so just not letting it, I feel like finding the balance of critiquing myself, but not getting it to where I'm digging myself a hole by critiquing myself. I feel like sometimes I can, especially when I'm in a slump, like you don't need like a home run to get out of it. And I'd get like a little dinker hit and I'd be like, well, didn't hit it hard. And instead of being like, well, I ended my 0 for 13 streak, like stuff like that. Just like finding those ways to get out of it instead of being so hard on myself.
I love that so much. The common theme, and it's so important, is most people assume that Lauren and Hannah, before they say, oh, you're Division I athletes at Arkansas. The reason why they're there and they're great is because they don't struggle with things like I do. They don't struggle with self-talk or getting nervous. But we always like to remind people that the best athletes in the world, including the two of you, struggle with everything that most of the average athletes struggle with. But you get very much better at awareness of what you struggle with and strategies to deal with it. And that's what we're always encouraging other athletes and coaches that are listening to help their athletes, is that the best struggle with all this. It's not unusual, but they don't think that's the case. But it's the difference is you get really good at being aware it's hurting me, and then coming up with strategies that are unique to you that help you move on. And the outcome behavior for both of you is confidence, which is really cool. Jess, I know you've been listening to this conversation to build off of that.
So you saying you struggle? Really?
Yeah.
and we can laugh, right? Because every athlete that's listening to this, I think we're afraid of struggle. So how do you lean into the struggle, right? And you already talked about those strategies, but what else has helped you maybe that you hadn't mentioned? I think earlier one of you said something about a journal. How has that journal helped you? And then how did you embrace that struggle knowing that you weren't going to stay there? I think there's a lot of athletes that are maybe in the middle of that struggle. How do you stay in it and lean into it rather than run away?
So one thing that we did this year, we have our hitting journals, and we talk a lot about your plan, approach, and your mindset. And so we write down like what your plan is, what your approach is, and what your mindset is. And I think the biggest thing for me was going back to my mindset. When I was writing in that, I was like, wow, like your mindset isn't, oh, I hope I get a double here, or I need to move this runner. It's literally telling yourself like, I'm better than the person I'm facing. And so I think that for me was like, wow, if I have to write that I'm better than the person in front of me, and that's all I have to do. Like, it was literally those words right there that I was like, that's what I'm not telling myself, is that I'm better than the person I'm facing every single time.
Yeah, I would definitely say the journal and like just writing down those things, because I feel like, especially if you're like in the bottom of the seventh, like the bases are loaded, like everyone wants to be that person that's like, oh, I want the walk-off grand slam, or I want the walk-off home run. Like, instead of thinking about like the result, thinking about like, yeah, it might be some All-American out there, but you're better than her right now. So just like thinking things like that instead of being so result-based, because when you get result-based, you get consumed. And most of the time when you're like consumed in the result, it's never going to happen. So I would say just being positive about yourself and not getting so tensed up and letting like your emotions take over.
And I think that when you talked about the part like knowing you're going to get out of it, I think that for me it was realizing like all the work that I put in, like you guys talked about the commitment, like, okay, like I've put all this work in. At some point, people don't just put in all this work for nothing, and at some point it doesn't pay off. So I think it was just like, you don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. But I think it was like, my parents always tell me like, Hannah, it's going to happen. And it was really hard to believe at the time. But I think I was like, okay, well, I hit with my sister every single day and it's happened for her. So if I can just believe in myself, it's going to happen for me too.
Yeah, I would say each other helps us get out of it a lot. Like, especially for me, like, what was that?
Wait, you need people? You need each other? Tell me about this.
I would
say do it by yourself.
Especially for me last year, like when I was going through, like I was 0 for 13 or 14 at one point, and I remember like I wasn't really like aware that it was 0 for 13 or 14. I just knew I hadn't got a hit in a long time, but I wasn't really caught up in the numbers of it. And I was like, every time I come back to the dugout after getting like out, I'd like go put my shin guards on, and Hannah would have to like come over to me and be like, Lauren, like it's gonna end at some point. Like you need to get over it. It's gonna end. And I remember our director of ops, like I'd be like catching in the bullpen, and he'd come up to me, and every day he'd tell me like, you're gonna go 2 for 2 this game. You're gonna go 3 for 3 this game. And at one point, he told me we were at Mizzou's when I got out of it. And he came up to me and he was like, you're going to go 3 for 3 this game. And I was like, you know what? I am going to go 3 for 3 this game. And I did. So it's just like those things. I feel like relying on the people that are around you to build you up and not getting so like hunkered down and just being like, I got to figure this out myself. Like sometimes like your parents or your coach, like it's okay to ask them to help you instead of just realizing that it's not all on you to get out of it.
I'd say, yeah, the same thing for me. It was like I never – the first like 3 months when I was really struggling, it was like I never wanted to talk about it. I was like, you know, like I don't want to talk to my parents about it. I just would rather be mad about it and sad about it. And I heard my mom was like, I don't care if you talk to me, if you talk to your sister, if you talk to a teammate, if you talk to the sports psychologist, but you have to talk to someone. She was like, you're literally letting it eat you alive by keeping it inside of you. And so I ended up talking to my sister, a few people on the team, and I was like, wow, like it felt like just like I could breathe. So I was just keeping it all inside of me, and it was making it so much worse.
Doc, it sounds like one of our ingredients, you know, there's 6 of them when we talk about confidence. So I want to turn it back to you. They said a lot of wisdom there for our athletes and our audience to catch on to.
Yeah. So again, for both of you, I think it's this really simple. It's a simple question. It may be a harder one to answer, but when we talk about confidence, we've talked about preparation and hard work. We've been talking a lot about your own self-talk. And then our third ingredient of confidence is what teammates or coaches can say or do for us that can either help us or hurt us. So, and then our fifth ingredient is the role of our parents or friends, or maybe a twin sister too in this case. But so we've kind of got that. So my question is going to be twofold for both of you. Let's start with the role that your teammates can play for you. And then we're going to get into coaches and parents. So I want to know what role does your teammates play for you in either helping your confidence or hurting your confidence?
I feel like your teammates can be your biggest helper and can also be your worst helper in it. I feel like if it's really important to know your teammates because not everyone reacts the same. Like someone like for Hannah and I, like if she has a bad practice, like I know like I can get on her to help her like you're slacking, like you got to get out of it. But there's some people who don't respond well to that. So I feel like just knowing like how everyone responds will be the biggest factor in how well your teammates can help you because they can hurt you or they can really help you.
I think, yeah, we talked about that a lot this fall. Our biggest thing was like holding each other accountable on the team. And I think the one day at practice, we like all sat in a circle and we all went around and said something that takes courage for us. And I think that was something that was like really big because it made you realize like something that might not be hard for you is really hard for somebody else. So I think that it made you realize like how at practice, how you can get on to someone and get the best out of them rather than just approaching everyone the same and expecting the same result.
Yeah. So part of that exercise is what we always talk about, however you do it. It's part communication, understanding what you may need may be different than someone else. We always joke about the person who, doesn't like to be physically touched, but they never tell their teammate, and their teammate says, well, I've been patting you on the butt for a month now. And you're like, yeah, I hate it. But do you ever tell your teammate no? And they think they're helping and they're not, because some of you like physical touch. Some like to be able to get on you a little bit. And some of you guys, if you got on somebody, they'll crumble because of their own wiring. And so I love that you brought that up because it also requires a little bit of vulnerability, right? That courage to tell a teammate, hey, this is what I need, or here's what takes courage for me. And so whenever you get really good at helping each other out with confidence, it requires part really communicating better and part being vulnerable enough to say, I need your help. Or I know you mean well, but I don't like it when you do it that way for me. That doesn't help me. That takes courage to tell another teammate, it doesn't work for me what you do, because there's always that risk. Maybe they won't like me as much or something, right? So tell Tell us the roles of your coaches then. So the teammates can play a big role. What role do coaches play in either helping or hurting your confidence?
I feel like with coaches, like a lot of people stray away from talking to them just because, like, as an athlete, you don't want your coach to see you as someone who's weak or like can't handle getting yelled at or stuff like that. So I feel like, especially with the coach, it's important to know how your players react as well. Like, some kids on our team don't do well, like with physical touch, or like don't do well, like in certain situations. And it's like important for them to know that, because you can really hurt someone if you put them into a bad situation. So I feel like that it goes the same for coaches as well.
But I think that they're just as important as your teammates, because I think that they see things from a different perspective than kids who are 19 and 23 years old. So I think that they see things that maybe us as a team, we don't think that we're struggling, or we even don't want to hear it. So I think that that's something, like, even this fall that our coaches have helped a ton, like just pointing things out, like, hey, like, we can say that you need to get better at this, but it's going to take you guys as each other's teammates to make yourselves better. So I think that at the end of the day, it's up to the players to get themselves out of it or to change it. But I think that they're huge in just bringing it up, honestly, making yourself, that you're making the team, you as an individual, aware that this is what's going on, or good or bad.
We always talk to coaches about making sure they're aware of how you're wired and what makes you tick and what makes you happy or sad, or maybe why one of you on the team may shut down when a coach yells in front of the team. Not because you're necessarily weak, but maybe they came from an experience where somebody was verbally abusive to them, and that it triggers a reaction in them. And so that it's good for coaches to understand what either helps or hurts. And I was going to ask you this anyway, but you have brought up your parents multiple times today in a positive light, in the way I've taken it. Every time they're giving you perspective, but can you put into words the role that your parents have played for you in general, and then as it relates to confidence?
They were huge. I mean, throughout everything, not even just like softball, like everyday life, just the way they've changed our perspective on things, and just realized, like, just brought us down to earth a little bit on things like that. And not realize, like, oh, softball is not the end of the world if I don't get a hit and things like that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think that, I mean, we wouldn't be here without them. So I think that, I mean, they taught me how to work hard, but then they also get me out of my lowest of lows. I think that if it wasn't for my mom and dad last year, or my sister, I don't know if I would have ever found the confidence in myself. So I think that they really just, they believe in you no matter what as a parent. So I think that when they're telling you that they believe in you, at some point it was like, okay, like, my mom has told me for 6 days in a row that she thinks I can do it. So why can I not tell myself that I can do it? So I think that just things like that, they really, them being so positive and having so much belief in you, just really, it gives yourself the confidence that you need.
I say especially like my dad, he's the one who throws us front toss and hit with us every day through high school. So like when he tells us, like, you've done it for how long? Like, I'm like, oh, well, you've the one who's throwing me front toss for this long. So maybe he does know what he's talking about. Like, just things like that. Like, not like, they just have seen us every day and seen what we've gone through. So.
Yes, anything to add to that, the role of coaches, teammates, or parents, or anything else as it relates to confidence?
Mm-hmm. Girls, I want to know, have you ever had to coach a parent or a teammate on what has worked or what hasn't? And how do you have a brave conversation? And sometimes, we run away from conflict, or we're afraid to really tell our teammates or parents what we need from them when it comes to our confidence. How would you suggest a strategy, or maybe have you done that in the past that you can share an example?
Let me think. I would try to say, like, even like I was talking about this fall a lot as our team, like holding each other accountable. And I think that we honestly really struggle with it because everybody was like, we don't want each other to be mad at each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, or we don't want so-and-so to be mad at me because I said that. So I think that it was like a few times, like, I had to do it, like say things to people, and I was so nervous. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm literally scared. And so I think that it was like, just like talking to people about it before you did it. I talked to some of my teammates. I was like, hey, like, I don't want people to think that I'm coming off as this way. And even one of my other teammates, she came up to me and she was like, I want to hold people accountable, but she was like, I don't want people to think that I'm mad at them. And I was like, I know who you are as a person. So I know that like, you're not mad at me. You're looking at it as my best interest. So I think that just like being able to have those conversations with your teammates or your siblings or your parents, just like telling them like, who they are as a person. So that it's coming from a good place, and like just giving them the confidence to be able to speak up. Cause I think that that's something it's hard for everyone. Nobody wants to be the person to speak up or bring up something that's the team or someone else is struggling with. So I think that just maybe having a conversation with someone that's not in front of everyone is something that can really help. Like just one-on-one conversations, like, hey, like maybe you should try this, or hey, maybe we should do this together, like things like that.
Yeah, I would definitely say like conversations within each other helped a lot. Just like knowing the background of everyone and things like that to help ease it when you do it.
I want to dive in a little bit more with this because I think there's a mindfulness, right, that you had, and you had to be vulnerable. So, Doc, you know what question I'm going to ask already, but tell me a little bit more about vulnerability. And has it always been a strength for you? Do you see it as a strength, right? But vulnerability is not easy. How do you embrace it? And do you view it as a strength?
I feel like we've always been like pretty outgoing people. So like for me, like talking in front of people hasn't been like something that's like I'm scared to do. But I feel like depending on what you talk about can get scarier as you do it. So like especially like if I was like to talk in front of the team and like just make an announcement or something like that, like that's not hard like for me. But like to have to talk about like feelings and stuff like that, or like get on someone, like that's hard. Like no one like wants to be vulnerable in front of people. I feel like that.
Yeah, I would say kind of the same for me. I think I'm getting better at it. I wouldn't say it's one of my strengths. I think that talking about my feelings to people is something I absolutely hate. I would rather just not say anything. And so I think that for me, it was kind of like, I think as a team, everybody has to do it at some point. I mean, so I think that it was like, okay, well, maybe if I start doing it, it'll give other people the confidence to do it. So I think that for me, I mean, it's obviously easier. I have a sister on the team. And so but I think it's like just knowing that, okay, if I do it, maybe somebody else will be like, okay, she can do it, so I can do it. That's kind of like how I looked at it to give myself the courage to do it.
Yeah, I would definitely say we were some like the first ones to do it this year, and it was scary. It's like we're sophomores, and usually like on teams like it's like the seniors and stuff like that you're looking for to do it. So I just feel like to be like a younger person who does it was a little scary. Just like you don't know, like you don't want to step on anyone's toes and stuff like that. So I feel like just doing it to help lead others to do it was one of the biggest factors.
So you led by example. And Doc, I know we get the privilege to work with athletes, teams, and coaches all the time when it comes to erasing that stigma, right? Specifically with mental health, but also being in a safe environment where you can talk about vulnerability, strengths. You can teach, courageous conversations, lean into conflict and the struggle. But Doc, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know I can already hear your brain thinking.
Well, I mean, it's fun when you get to just listen, because Hannah, you said it a couple times, right? Like almost you rather do anything else in this world than actually discuss. Even though, like you said, you've gotten better at it, and you know why. What do you think? What do you think the cost is? Not just for you, but just in general. What's the cost of stuffing feelings and not sharing really with anybody, or not very many people, what I'm thinking and feeling for long periods of time?
I think it really just, in the moment, you don't realize how much it's dragging you down. But I think that over time, it's like, wow, like you don't realize like how unhappy it's making you. And then like over time, you're like, wow, like I really could have just talked about that, and I wouldn't have thought about it for 2 weeks if I would have just talked for 20 minutes with somebody about it. Instead, you're filling yourself with anxiety over just keeping it inside of you because you're like, thinking about it before you go to bed. You're thinking about it when you wake up, just things like that. So just talking to somebody, then it might make you sleep better at night, just things like that.
Yeah, I love that you put it into words, anxiety, because high performing females in particular, either if we're worrying too much about the future or we're not dealing with our emotions, anxiety is one of the main outcome feelings that we have. And that's not fun because it can lead to bad sleep. And who wants to be anxious, right? I mean, but there's times to be anxious in this world, but it's not a very comfortable feeling, and neither is vulnerability. But so we always say that, there has to be a benefit to vulnerability if you're going to do it, because it's not fun, it's not comfortable. But because if you can look at the cost of vulnerability, when you stuff your feelings, we tend to stuff our good emotions too. And it can kind of overwhelm us. Now, you mentioned that word, sports psychologist. I'm not asking whether you've seen them or not, but you did mention, like, mom or somebody said, like, look, you have to talk to somebody, sports psychologist, your sister, a teammate. But we're pretty heavily involved in the Play for Page 33 Foundation. I know that you were teammates of Paige Reesner. Now, for those who don't know who she is, we've talked about her on our podcast before. She was a teammate of yours at Scott Catholic, was going to play at the University of Sioux Falls, but took her life. And her parents, Barb and Jason, unbelievably, to be honest with you, have been able to put together a foundation where I think a lot of parents might have gone the opposite way and just shut down. And they decided to put together a foundation to help provide awareness and education for student athletes in particular. And of course, their love of the softball space to, help maybe not have any other parents have to feel what they feel, but probably more important to make sure that athletes know that they're not alone. And I know that you've thought about that foundation. You've taught, the Reasoners well. What impact has Paige Reesner's story had on the two of you in general when you think about the role that taking care of your mindset or your mental health plays in overall well-being?
I would say that it was the first time I had ever lost anyone to suicide when Paige passed away. So I would say it really opened my eyes, because Paige was never someone that I would expect when I found out. So just realizing that, like, it really opened my eyes to mental health. Just realizing that, like, people hide it and that you don't know, and just like the unknown of it really opened my eyes to it.
I would say the same thing. Just like Paige was someone who came every day, never complained, always had a smile on her face. So I think that just really how you treat other people, how you talk to yourself, because you never know what the person next to you is going through because they're not talking about it. And I think that that's honestly what Paige taught me. I never knew she was really struggling. I mean, everyone has bad days, but I mean, Paige never used it as a crutch or anything. So I think that she came every day with a smile on her face, never complained. And it's like, wow, if that happened to Paige, like, how many other people are going through, you know what I mean? They don't talk about it. And I think that it's just like realizing, just share your feelings with people, because so many people want to help you. And I think that that's something that opened my eyes to, is how many people are there to help you, how many resources there are. And just, I mean, Paige always had a smile on her face. So just things like that.
And she always she was always there she always was worried about, like, what somebody else was and not herself. So I feel like just realizing that, like, not always everyone's mental health, but still taking time for yourself and not always having to be worried about someone else's. I feel like that opened my eyes a lot, that she always cared more about how Hannah and I were doing than her realizing how she was doing.
Another good lesson too, right? It's cool to be selfless, but you got to take care of yourself first, right? They always say you got to put the oxygen mask on first on a plane before you can help your kid, because you have to make sure you can breathe to help somebody else breathe. But so when you hear this data, and obviously knowing Paige like you did, and knowing her story, and knowing your own mindset challenges that go along with being an elite athlete, whether or not we have a mental health struggle, there's mindset issues that go along with every elite athlete. That's been the whole bulk of what we talked about today. And when you hear that the Division I data for student athletes, at about 15 to 20% reported clinical depression, and about 30% said they had so much anxiety that they felt overwhelmed, but only about 10% of student athletes in college got help. And, just over half of college athletes even knew where to ask for help in their own college. How do we improve those numbers? Not necessarily the numbers of percentages of people that have depression and anxiety. How do we improve the numbers of people that are willing to go talk about their feelings if they need to? Not always with a professional, because it's not always necessary, but to somebody, and then certainly a professional when necessary. How do we do that? What through your lens?
I would say, like, especially with, like, back to, like, Arkansas, once we get into season, we have a meeting with our sports psychologist as a team once a week. And we do, like, breathing exercises and just things like that to help us grow more together as a team, stuff like that. So I feel like having him there, it allows us to build a relationship with him. So just realizing that, like, he's someone that we can trust, and that, like, it's not just, like, us going to knock on some random person's door that we've never met before. Like, us being able to have a conversation with him as a team in a group setting and building that relationship before we get, I don't know, the courage to go talk to him alone.
I would say the same thing, just having a relationship with that person, whoever it is, who you're going to ask help, and just, I mean, what everyone says, making sure people don't feel alone. I think that's the biggest thing with athletes. They don't want people to think of them differently because they struggled with something or because they came out and said it. I think that's the biggest thing that, I mean, everybody doubts themselves at some point or doesn't have confidence in themselves. So I think that just letting everyone know that they're not alone, because 10 people standing around you are probably going through the exact same thing as you. So I think that that's the biggest thing.
That normalizing the discussion and having coaches who say that sports psychology is an important component of overall performance and well-being. Whether you need to use them individually or not is a separate issue. And I think Jess can comment on this more, but I think one of the cool things in 2023 as we wrap up this year is that we've had a series of elite high-performing athletes, many from the state of Nebraska, many from Scott Catholic, actually, who all share common characteristics. I say this to everybody, right? They are all elite at what they do. They all struggle with something, and they're all willing to talk about it. And to me, that is the number one thing that I have seen in helping people in the state of Nebraska be more willing to talk to somebody or share their feelings with somebody, whether it's professional or not, because we're seeing all these other elite athletes like yourself saying, hey, it's just part of being human, and whatever mechanism you deal with it, and you got to deal with it somehow. And stuffing feelings for too long is not probably the best solution. We're all going to do it at times, and that's just being human as well. So, Jess, what are your thoughts listening to them just kind of share their thoughts and feelings about the role that mindset and mental health play in overall well-being of a student athlete?
Well, since we have sisters on this podcast, I'm going to ask one of my favorite questions, but I'm going to have Lauren, you're going to tell Hannah, if you could go back to maybe the 12-year-old to 14-year-old self and almost give advice or to hype her up, what would you say? And then Hannah to Lauren. And the reason being is the impact, right? Even though you're siblings and teammates, sometimes we take for granted how much of a positive word or encouragement goes. And so constantly as athletes, you're based upon performance. Do this, got to be better, 1% better. We need to go do extra reps, but let's call out the gold. Maybe you could give each other advice to your 12 to 14-year-old self. What would you say to each other?
Like my advice to,
her advice to me, right? Okay.
Correct.
I think I would tell Lauren to keep working hard and just to stay positive. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, and to keep going. I think keep going would be the biggest thing that I would have told her 12-year-old self, because I think that it would have been so easy to give up. So I think literally just the words keep going would have just been the drive and motivation to give your 12-year-old self, just to not give up on the dream you have of playing college softball.
I would say that to be more open-minded and just realize like what you have out in front of you, and to not be so hard on yourself. If you wouldn't have been open-minded to get on the team, we never would have been here today. And that you get really hard on yourself when things are bad. And so to just realize that you've worked your entire life for this. And
Was that hard or easy to do?
Kind of hard.
Why? Why was it hard?
I think it's just hard, like, to put into words, or like just to even like think of, like, I don't know, we're so competitive with each other. So I think even just like wanting to tell each other like the good things can be hard too. I mean, it's like you want to tell them like what they're doing bad to make Lauren better, but it's also like maybe some days you just need to tell her like, you looked really good today at fielding, or things like that. So I think that it's just hard. Like, you're so competitive, and it's so hard just to, I mean, heck, we barely hug each other to give each other compliments.
I would say it's hard too, like when, not even like just now, but like when we hit like how you receive it. I feel like a lot of the times, even when like we critique each other, we'll always be like, well, you're just saying that because you're doing good right now, or something like that. Like, you want to tell me what to do because you're doing good right now. So just realizing that like it's still coming out of a place of love. Like, she wants to make you better. She really does think that about you. Like, just the way you receive it too, I feel like it's hard sometimes.
Right. And the last part too, and again, I'm going to continue, right, to coach you to start speaking a little bit more positive in a good way. You're doing a great job, but I want to hear your most proudest moment, and you have to answer it for yourself. And then I'll turn it back to Doc. Let's celebrate you both.
Like,
come on, let's hear it.
softball?
What are your most, just in general, like from now, from even when you're young to now, to who you are today? What are we celebrating?
I think my proudest moment is probably just making it to play Division I softball. I think that it's something that no one in our family has ever done, and I think that it's just, I don't even really know how to put it into words, honestly. Just being able to give myself the opportunity to get the degree to play softball, and I think that it honestly, to this day, I can't believe that I'm actually doing it. I think that it just, like, it's like all the hard work. I mean, you put in the hard work for years, and for so many years, you don't know that it's going to get you anywhere. I mean, it might not, it might. So I think that it's just, it makes me so proud that I put in all the work for those years, and that it really did pay off.
I feel like mine is that we stuck together. I feel like it would have been easy for us to separate, and just because it is like, well, I don't even know the percent, like 2% make it to play Division I sports or whatever it is. So, and let alone that we did it at the same school, I feel like it could have been easy for us to realize that it would have been easier for us to go separate, and like money wise and to like up like position wise to go separate. But we stuck to it since we were 8 that we were going to play together, and we never gave up on that. So I'm proud of us for sticking with that.
That's a good one.
So many important lessons learned and wisdom, and I just think that thank you to you both for sharing that vulnerability. And Doc, you and I are always focused on progress, right? And the results will take care of themselves. And you heard what they just said. I'm going to turn it back to you.
I love both their answers, to be honest with you, because they both perfectly, it's a perfect marriage of those two answers, because I think they both could have answered them. They both would believe the second part for themselves as well. How proud it was for Lauren to make it as a D1 athlete, right? And for probably, Hannah, for you guys, same thing, because you mentioned it before, the amount of times that you've stuck together. So even though those were your individual proudest moments, I think they would be probably 1A for the other one as well. So, but just to hear you guys describe it that way is pretty cool. But really, the whole conversation today, I think, has been about you guys acknowledging the things you struggle with, the strategies to deal with it, and the people along the way that have helped you. Now you have this unique twin experience that's really made that even more powerful, because not everybody has a twin or a best friend like that on top of it. But it takes a village, and you mentioned parents, coaches, teammates, each other, sometimes sports psychology, sometimes just having anybody on the team or a friend to listen to you, but to get your feelings out there. So we've actually asked you a ton of questions today. I don't have any more. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add or anything that we forgot to ask you that you want to share with us before we go. But I really feel like I've gotten every answer that I want from Hannah and Lauren today. Any last thoughts from you guys?
I would just say to all the athletes out there, just don't be scared to share your feelings, share your thoughts, or talk to someone, because it really will help you. And I think that I would tell anyone else to never give up on what your dream is or what you're working for, because you'll get there eventually if you put in the work.
Yeah, I would say that too. Like, life's hard, school's hard, sports are hard, everything's hard, and that you're not the only one that it's happening to. So just realize that you can count on the people around you.
And I would also say to give yourself some grace, because things are hard, and just if you give yourself some grace, it'll make it a lot easier.
Well, Jess and I love that word grace for a lot of different reasons. But I love the fact that you both had a smile on your face when you said life can be hard, school can be hard, because it can be. And you can still do things in life with a smile on your face at some level while things are still really hard. And I think a lot of people don't realize how hard it is, even though you said we've made it, to where you've made it, but it's still hard every day to be an elite student athlete. To be a student athlete in general, really anywhere in this world, there's a lot of moving parts. So we are very thankful that you were able to share your experiences with us today, especially in the state of Nebraska here, where we take so much pride in having so many athletes willing to share their stories. And we always say every time that an athlete is willing to share their story, our goal is that we hope it reduces the shame and stigma for anybody else, or at least normalizes the discussion of it's okay to work on confidence. It's okay to work on self-talk. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to acknowledge that life's hard. It's okay to work on your mental health if you need to. And the more I think other people hear that from athletes like you who have a platform, I think it just makes it just a little bit easier for others to reach out and work on themselves. So thank you so much, both of you, Hannah and Lauren, for being on the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook, or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You are listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.